Perception is not reality. Threats are not real. If you're working in the office and you're constantly getting triggered, this can be really detrimental to your career. In today's podcast, I'm going to talk to you about this dynamic and how to overcome it. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the professional life and PTSD. Because if you have PTSD, you know that it's so difficult to focus and commit and be emotionally stable in the workplace because the work environment can be toxic and it could be triggering you. So perception is not reality because those threats are not real. And how do you deal with these perceived threats? How do you deal with getting triggered? This is something I overcame because I have CPTSD, and I know all about how my emotions were dysregulated because a large part of my life, especially in the school setting, I would get triggered. And I'd blow up on people, I'd be super critical, and that would ruin all of my relationships, both in the professional world and in the personal life. And people will always think, what the heck's the matter with this guy, Spencer? And later on, when I learned about emotional dysregulation, I realized I had all the tools to overcome this, which was yoga and meditation. I began to apply the mind training practices from meditation back into my life and learn how to resolve this emotional dysregulation, how to create emotional stability. Now, later on, when I started taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a grappling martial art, I really overcame the rage, the real getting triggered. You know what I mean if you have PTSD. And we all know that if you're going to rage out in the professional world, how detrimental that can be, both to your job and your reputation. So with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the sparring, being confronted with, a challenging situation, because it triggered I was tortured when I was 4 and 5 years old, brought to the point of death. And so when I see a perceived threat, when I get triggered, it's not just like irritation. It's in my mind, I'm remembering that time of almost being killed, used as a sacrifice, if you will. And I have to tell myself, this is not that person. They're not trying to kill me. This is merely them sparring with me. And yeah, they're trying to choke me out or break my arm or put me in a joint lock, but they're my training partner. They're not a vicious person. They're not doing it to be maniacal or mean. It's just training. And actually, they want me to improve in my jiu-jitsu skills, and I want them to improve in their jiu-jitsu skills. That's what a training partner is. And I have to actually have this discussion in my mind enough times until getting triggered, I realize there's nothing to get triggered about. I can either rage out and get really aggressive in the fighting, or I can apply the solutions, the technique that was taught to me by the professor. And that's what I chose to do. I realized getting aggressive, getting angry is not going to help me win the sparring match, but rather applying technique will. Applying technique conquers strength. And if you've ever practiced a martial art, you know what I'm talking about. The higher belts have better technique. It doesn't matter how aggressive you get, the technique will always win. So that's how I really overcame the rage, the triggered that the emotional response was rage. Because underneath a lot of the getting triggered is the emotions of anger, rage, fear, guilt, and shame. You get irritated and then angry, then full of rage, and you flip out on somebody, and then you feel ashamed of it, you feel guilty, and then you're afraid of showing your face again, so you hide and isolate. That's usually the cycle of having PTSD or CPTSD. With CPTSD, there's a greater amount of emotional dysregulation. So working in a professional environment, you can easily get triggered by what people say, how people say things. People can be conniving, they can be condescending, they can be demanding, they can be unfair. And often these experiences trigger us with people who have PTSD or CPTSD. So how do you handle this in the professional workspace, whether it's an office or you're working in construction, working with a crew? It's the same thing. Number one, take a break. I mean, if you're overwhelmed with work, that stress is the same response as the flight, fight, fawn, or freeze response, the flight or fight response. It builds and builds and builds this tension inside of us until we explode, and that's what happens. So take a break. When you start to feel overwhelmed, when you start to find yourself being irritable, easily agitated, take a break. Tell your coworkers, listen, I need to take a 5-minute breather. Go for a walk outside. Go for a walk around the site. Take a breather. Now, in other words, literally take deep breaths. Stretch. Go find a nice quiet space and just stretch your body. Get grounded in your body. It's very calming. Jumping jacks. Get your heart rate going. Take that being irritated, being amped up, and channel it into the physical activity. 50 jumping jacks, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 body squats. Just get right into exercising your body. Get that heart rate pumping. Get that blood flowing. And that just circulates all of the adrenaline, all that cortisol that's building up. It allows you to breathe and oxygenates the brain, and that also can clear your head. Now, tapping, this is a new technique. You can find the app on the App Store with iPhone or for Google Store. There's these different points in the body that are sequential, and you just tap on them to calm yourself down. It's a very calming experience. I'm not going to get into the actual technique. You can research that yourself. Now, also listening to music, going in your car and just putting on some of your favorite music, changing your mood through sound. Often putting on your favorite tune just puts you in a great mood, and then you go back to work. Find a closet and scream your lungs out. Just let it out. You go find a nice, spot on the other side of the office or another floor, or take a walk and go find a spot where people aren't going to hear you, and just yell into the air. It's like hitting a punching bag. Just let that frustration out and vent. Very soothing and very relaxing. Now, number 2, own your perception. Remember, you got to understand your triggers, because perception is not reality. What you think is a threat is not actually a threat. It's just a person being annoying, or just a person being demanding. It could be a shirt that someone wears that reminds you. It could be an odor. No one ever knows what's going to trigger you but you. And getting to know your triggers helps you to desensitize, detune these triggers. Because when you get triggered, as I was explaining earlier when I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'd get triggered because this guy would be mauling me, and I realized I have to apply technique or get submitted. There was a split moment of clarity where I actually realized they're not trying to kill me. So when you're able to realize that this person is not a threat, they're not the abuser, it's just the way they sounded or what they said, the words they used might have been the same words as your father or whoever abused you. And that just reminds you, and to have enough mental clarity to know the difference. In other words, be mindful. Be mindful of your reactions. Be mindful of your thoughts. Be mindful of what you're perceiving, what you're seeing, and what you're hearing primarily. Could be a smell, whatever sense perception that enables you to get triggered, in other words, like a sight or what a person says. Be mindful that what you heard or what you see is not a threat at all. Remember, it's all in our mind. It's all in the perception. And it triggers a memory. And the memory of trauma is what initiates the emotional upset. Because the mind will replay the traumatic event and then will project that memory onto the circumstance, thinking these people are the ones abusing us, when in fact They are not. It's simply our memory gets triggered. And having enough mind training to be aware of your thoughts, to be aware of your feelings, to know that your mind reacts to what you perceive, that you can actually choose your reaction. In other words, you are not at the mercy of your emotions, that you can master your emotions. I'll get into that a little later. But the more you can desensitize your triggers or have the distinction between the way this person comes across or whatever the trigger is, that's merely that particular moment in time, that's the reality that you coexist with, that it is not the time that you were being abused, if I'm making myself clear. To have that's what helps me, to know the difference between what is happening now and the memory in my mind, and that desensitizes the trigger. So understanding that perception is not reality, that what your reaction to what you perceive is merely just a reaction. It's not what's actually happening. This person is not trying to threaten you or abuse you. Number 3, there are people who are jerks. Yeah, there are people who are going to be condescending, who are going to be conniving, who are going to be manipulative, who are going to be put you down, who are going to be aggressive. Yeah, there are people that are just straight up jerks in the work environment. Stay away from them. There are bullies in the work environment, just like high school. And it's something you have to deal with. You can't get away with it if you value your job. You got to learn to deal with these people in a constructive manner. In other words, you have a conversation with them. Look, I don't appreciate your condescending tone. Look, I can tell you're being conniving. You're trying to manipulate me right now, and I see through it. Give it to me straight. Just be real with me. That's all that I ask. Can you do that? I actually say that to people sometimes, and they're like, what? I'm just asking for honesty. Is that too much to ask for? Can you just be honest with me? And then they get like, and usually they drop it. Like, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. Okay, this is what's really going on. And then they pretty much become authentic. And then you get to know what they're really saying and where they're really coming from. You go, oh, say, I knew that attitude you pulled. Well, you probably have a lot on your plate and you're having a bad day. I get it. I don't need to take you personally, in other words, but you were acting like a jerk and I don't appreciate it. Now, if that doesn't work, then you need to report them to human resources. You got to report them to HR. And if they are being a jerk to not only you, but other coworkers, that's a pretty good reason to report them to HR and have them reprimanded. Because a person like that is a toxic person, and just that they're just toxic in the work environment. It makes not only your bad day, but everybody's day bad. So, get together with other employees and ask, am I just being triggered here, or is that person acting like a jerk? And get confirmation before you go to HR. Don't gang up on the person. Don't talk behind their back. Don't create gossip. Just get a straight answer. Hey, is it just me, or is that person just being a real a-hole? No, they tend to act like that. That's Joe or whoever they are. Okay, so it's not just me. Get it from a couple of people. Then report them to HR. So you have, you have a list of people. You have a group of people that can confirm your perception that sometimes it isn't your perception. Sometimes they are a jerk. Now, number 4, seek self-mastery. Think of the word fear, false evidence appearing real. Is the threat real? If it's not a real threat, there's no cause for alarm. Your flight, fight, freeze, or fawn response is getting activated. And what do I mean by that? The flight or fight response is when a tiger is chasing after you. You're either going to fight it or you're going to run. We all know that, that phrase, the flight or fight response, but there's also the freeze and the fawn response, where you freeze like a chameleon freezes and changes colors to blend in with its environment in order to protect itself from a predator. We human beings do that. It's called a polyvagal nerve theory, where we freeze and we go into the analysis paralysis. We shut down emotionally so I don't have to feel the trauma. And we just become very just unemotional, very just stoic, numb, and there's no real vitality in our being, and just monotone voice. And we just analyze the world, and you can see people just stuck like this or like this in this posture that is defensive. But it's really hard to connect with a person in that frozen state. The fawn response is going to be the people pleaser. You feel so scared and you need to just appease your abusers. It usually happens with people who suffer from years of child abuse or were kidnapped. They just they say things to please the abuser. And there's these responses when you just shut down and you're just going to say whatever they want to hear and say whatever satisfies them. And you realize you're getting triggered, and this feeling it can be upsetting. And then you go home and complain about work because you're getting triggered in the office. And that's just, is it a real threat? Is somebody really challenging your life, or is it challenging your skills? Is it challenging your integrity, which is fair game in the workplace? Look, if you're not doing your job well, and you're not performing the tasks and completing those tasks on time, then a person has every right to hold you accountable. Being held accountable is not a threat to your life. It could be a threat to your job. It could be a threat to your position, which certainly should raise an alarm, not to fight or flip out, but to give cause to, I better work harder. I better get some training so I can perform these tasks with more proficiency because I'm getting paid. I'm responsible for this certain task that I'm assigned with. So knowing that when you have CPTSD or PTSD, you're going to have emotional dysregulation because of the trauma. Your brain is hardwired differently now, especially with CPTSD. There's permanent changes in the brain that creates this permanent emotional dysregulation. And just like myself, I have to constantly apply techniques to regulate my emotions. If I don't, my emotions get the best of me. And I do that with meditation, with certain mind training techniques. So I understand that there is no threat. I use breath work, visualization, and mantra. And I know that what I focus on becomes my reality, that I can shift my focus away from the memory being triggered onto, say, an object of meditation, i.e. my breath or mantra, and then my brain calms down. Now, that's something I learned how to do from living in a yoga ashram, studying with a Zen teacher. I have a degree in psychology, went through life coaching as a student, courses myself, and have taken courses to get certified. So I have this understanding, which enables me to regulate my emotions more effectively. Now, that's just something I have done. And it's something you can do is yoga. Yoga and all of the practices that I have done, it has been yoga that has the most immediate calming effect, calming impact on my mind. Now, that's what works for me. It could be, I also go to the gym, which is great. I just get my frustrations out on the weights and just really get into the fighting aspect. Because believe it or not, fighting, the fight, freeze or fawn, that fighting portion is actually the courage. The problem with that is when you get so invested in fighting, you become aggressive and you can become a bully to make yourself feel safe. The flight, fight, freeze, or fawn system is designed to protect you and keep you safe. Understanding not only just intellectually the physiological, which is what I'm explaining now, but the experiential component. Because any athlete knows that when you're put into a challenge called a game, and what's on the line is your team either wins or loses, and your position on the team is compromised. Now, that's not a physical threat to your life, but it's a threat, it's a challenge to your reputation, to your integrity, to your skills. And you need to step up to the plate and improve your skills. And that requires training. So that often, that training in and of itself regulates your emotions. And by doing that, because neurologically speaking, it activates the prefrontal cortex, which then regulates the amygdala of the brain, which is the emotions and the flight or fight aspect of the brain. So that continual prefrontal cortex way of being, because you have to make decisions, executive decisions when you're an athlete, which is a physical application. So your heart rate's increased, your breath rate's increased. That's why I think martial arts is the best, hands down, athletic, activity to deal with CPTSD and PTSD. So understanding that fear means false evidence appearing real, that what triggers you is not a real threat, and having the training to keep your emotions calm so you can, in other words, keep your mind clear and make clear decisions and have healthy habits. That takes practice, and that's the fourth, seek self-mastery. Seek a technique that enables you to master yourself and master your emotions. So when you get triggered at work, there's 4 components, 4 things you can be aware of. Number 1 is take a break, take a breather. Number 2, own your perceptions. Understand your triggers. Understand that it's just your memory that's producing the emotional upset and not the person or circumstance. Number 3, maybe people are just jerks and you need to report them to human resources and have them reprimanded. Nobody enjoys a toxic work environment, and if some people can be toxic and maybe it isn't you, having the perception that, hey, it wasn't me, it really was that person. And number 4, seek self-mastery. Find a technique. It's usually meditation. It could be TM. It could be a Course in Miracles. It could be a course like Landmark Forum. There's many courses out there, self-development courses that help you master yourself. Go ahead and take them. If you have any questions regarding this matter, if you have PTSD and you're a professional in the workplace and you find yourself getting triggered, go ahead and contact me, because I am a life coach, and this is what I specialize in, is helping professionals succeed, professionals who have trauma in their history and find that their emotions tend to get the best of them. And you know who I'm talking about. Go ahead and contact me or leave a comment below. If you have any questions, also leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. I sure hope that helps. Thank you so much for listening.